Yeah, when we talk about this creative life, once we get into that place of faith where we really have it seated deep within us, even though challenges show up, we can weather them all. So this morning, I have a special guest. I don't know how many of you ever watched Hee-Haw in your younger days, but old Charlie Farquharson was a big part of that. He used to have a segment every time, and he has written a special version of the Genesis story to help us understand this creative process. So please help me introduce old Charlie Farquharson. Come on out, Charlie. So share with me how this Genesis story started.
All righty then. Well, at the start, there weren't not a thing. That'd be your void. It was dark, too. Absolute chaos. So God decided to do something about it. He said, let's have some light here. And there was right off. But there still weren't nothing to look at. He kept your dark, too, though. Now, he had two things going for him, night and day. He had one follow the other so he could keep track. And that was all in one day's work.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, we talked about this, the light. That is that indwelling creative genius that's within us when we are aware of that divine light that's part of us, that was created with us.
Woo-wee, if you say so.
Well, what happened next?
Well, on the second day, God said, we need some firmament in the middle of all this water. Now, don't go asking me where all that water come from, because I ain't got no single idea. But the firmament would shore up some of the water from the rest of the water. So God did it, and the firmament part became what we call heaven. Now, that was quite enough for the second day. But there was still all that loose water around, so he gathered most of what was under heaven, and he called it the seas. Now, so far, there was not a thing to stand on. So God said, what on earth am I going to do? And that's when he comes up with your dry land. So he said, let's get organized here. And earth brought up grass, and grass brought up herb, and herb brought up seed, and seed brung trees, and the trees brung fruit, and that was good. So far, that was 3 days.
Wow. Yeah, we were talking about this last week, that firmament represents our faith. It represents our ability to shine the light on infinite possibilities out there. It's really important when you're trying to create something new. And we also need to be able to imagine. We need to be able to look at things through the lens of God and see what's possible.
Sounds to me like you're just making up your own version of the Jenny Says story, just like I did. Personally, mine seems to make a little more sense, though.
So what happens next?
Okay, well, after that, God said, we need some lights at night, too. And so he made the moon for your night light. And God figured that'd go for years. And he put some side lights in, too. Not so much to light things up, but to give the place a little bit of a glow. And that'd be your stars. The moon and the stars worked nights, and the sun was put on the day shift. And God thought that setup should work out all right. That there was your fourth day, well, and night by that time. God said, look here, there's nothing doing in the waters, and so better stir things up a bit, get some creatures moving. Air's kind of empty, too. Might as well foul it up. Foul it up.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Okay. Well, and he done a whale of a job down to your smallest mini. Whale of a job. Then they was all told to get at it and being fruitful and multiplying. That day it had been your fifth.
Wow. So we've got day 4 and day 5, 2 great lights plus some stars and some swarming creatures. I wonder what that means metaphysically.
Well, personally, I believe that the sun represents our understanding and the moon represents our will or determination. And all those fish and birds, they're just swarming around like the thoughts in our mind.
That's pretty
But this
good.
is your lesson, preacher, so I'll let you get at it.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Charlie Farquharson, for sharing this with us. In a million years, I couldn't do it. There's a lot of realm of infinite possibilities, but I just don't think that's one of them for me. And I'm grateful to have friends that it is. Yeah, we're talking today about our understanding and our will in this process of unlocking and bringing it to its full expression our creative genius. Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, believed that the sun symbolized the awakening of understanding and that the moon was our power of will. Just think about that for a minute. Being receptive to your flow of imagination is like basking in the sun. If you remain open, then the understanding will come, the knowledge will begin to flow about how those imaginings can be achieved. If you ponder something long enough, it begins to kind of take some shape and form in a way that you can, wherever you might be in your own journey, wrap your mind around. And with that understanding, the will arises, the power, the motivation to move it into its next phase of expression. Now, the author tells us in the book, The Creative Life, Eric Butterworth says, like Moses when he's standing at the burning bush receiving a God idea, the first thing that he did was take off his shoes. Now, why would you take off your shoes? In metaphysical symbology, the feet represent our understanding, and the shoes represent the ways in which we're bound, we're limited, we're encased in that understanding. So taking your shoes off means that you are opening yourself up to understanding things in a new way. It's important in our own creative process that we remove our shoes, the shoes of our minds, our old way of thinking, so that a new light, a new awareness can be brought into our being. The moonlight, the will, supports us with the persistence to be able to both grasp what's wanting to form and then to call it forth into an idea. In our human understanding of will and the way we often experience it, the will supports the persistence to move things forward, same as in the metaphysical, but it's also almost always done by using our power, our determination, and this understanding that this is what's best. It is our own sheer force of our humanness that we can often bring things into being. But in the creative process, the will is better understood as willingness. Instead of the will that will assert its power irregardless of what else is happening, willingness is more about allowing. Now I want you to notice, in the Genesis story, each of these creative days, if you will, start with let there be. They don't say there will be, but let there be. And let changes the energy about how we work with this creative energy. We become open to it rather than already deciding what it's supposed to look like and forcing it to go in that direction. And we do this from a place of understanding that God's will is always about moving and perfecting itself in whatever the creation is unfolding right now. Whatever that is unfolding, God's will is always about bringing greater love into it, bringing greater light into it. the willingness to let it unfold as it is, or thy will, but not my will, and which is translated into let it unfold, this creation as it is in heaven, through this sense of divine awareness. It's a different way of moving into this. It's being willing to be open to however it's going to unfold without already predetermining what that's going to look like. The creative process continues through this process of evolution as we now understand, as we are now willing to be open to how it's going to unfold, as we're told with the swarming of the creatures, that the seas and the air became filled with all of this energy of living beings moving around. And metaphysically, as old Charlie so intuitively got, it represents all of the swarming of the thoughts that we have when we're first dealing with some kind of new idea, new wanting to bring something and experience something in a different way. It is its nature, the mind's nature, to attract these swarms to support us in that process, but we have to know how to work with them. Because sometimes they can feel overwhelming and we'll just simply want to shut them down because we can't seem to be comfortable with them the way that they're unfolding in our life. It feels, in many sense, like chaos. I don't know if you've ever felt that when you were trying to create and bring something new into being, that right before it, everything just seemed like it was falling apart and nothing was working, and there was nothing but disharmony going on out there and not what would feel like this beautiful God creation process. And if we're not comfortable with chaos, this can be the stumbling block that oftentimes keeps people from following through all the way to that physical manifestation of that creative idea. When these thoughts are emerging and swarming in our minds, they can oftentimes seem incoherent. They can seem contradictory to what we're trying to do, or even just plain overwhelming. And it can feel like the process has just gone amiss, like something, the wires have gotten crossed and somehow we're off track. But yet, this key tells us this is exactly the place that we need to be. And part of it is our willingness to be comfortable in the chaos. There feels like there's a lot of chaos in our world right now. I've got people telling me that things are falling apart and we are just going to collapse here at any moment if something doesn't change. How many of you have felt that way? If you listen to too much news, it can feel that way, that we are just on the brink of some major collapse, whether it's in our country or things happening all around the world. And yet, to be comfortable, to have the faith, to have the awareness that out of that chaos has been present in every major growth, evolutionary change from the beginning of humanity. I'm sure for every generation there has been moments. Those of you who grew up in the 60s or were born but were adults, older adults in the 60s, felt like that was a pretty chaotic time. Different wars have felt like they've been totally chaos. And yet, when we can be okay with being in the midst of chaos, but be grounded in the awareness that out of this something beautiful is going to emerge, and hold on to that, then we begin to move and to allow it and to see it unfolding in a new way. I love this quote from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He said, "One must have chaos in him to give birth to a dancing star." Think about that. The whole creative process in the physical world is all about chaos then being channeled to give birth to something that's unique and beautiful. And so as we move for a time where we're going to just bring our attention inward, the place where we call our meditation time, I'm going to ask you to just be okay with and be comfortable with whatever ideas might be swarming in your mind right now. So to pick maybe something that you've been thinking about that's been calling to your heart to want to be moved through this creative process, or perhaps that you're seeking some kind of solution for. And just bring it into your mind, into your heart. You might want to close your eyes just so you can focus your attention inward. And maybe just taking a breath or two. And allowing either that creative desire that's seeking to express itself, or something that's already here that you're looking for a creative solution to move through. And just give permission for ideas to swarm in your mind. Don't try and control or direct. Just allow all of those thoughts around this to simply move as they are being called together. It may feel chaotic, but just allow every little idea to have its place in this process. And then as you just sort of watch this unfolding, begin to notice if there's any patterns forming, any clusters of ideas that seem to be connected. As we observe these ideas and how they are moving and flowing between each other, there might even be a pattern that begins to form. Like the birds in the sky, as they become connected with one another, can fly in beautiful and unique patterns. See if these thoughts begin to converge in that way. And anytime you feel a little overwhelmed or uncomfortable with the chaos of your mind, just take another deep breath. And affirm within your heart, affirm within every part of your being the trust and the faith that out of this chaos, something beautiful will emerge if you are willing. If you seek to understand from a new perspective and then are willing to let it unfold. And as you bring your attention back to this time and to this space, know that you can return at any time to see and to observe and to bring a centering and a good foundation, a good firmament to this creative process unfolding within you. And as you take one more deep breath, whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. So, in the 90s, I started noticing the For Dummies books. Did you ever recognize those? The first one, I think, is Dummies for DOS, which was an old operating system a long time ago. A few of us remember that. But then they started to proliferate. There were many For Dummies books on a lot of different topics. It was meant to say, For those who don't have a whole lot of awareness, here's an easy, it was sort of like the Cliff Notes on a lot of different topics out there. And one day in my quietness time, I had this creative idea, this creative vision to write the book Spirituality for Dummies. And while I had done some personal study on a variety of different spiritual topics, I was not affiliated with anyone. I had not discovered unity. I was just kind of out there on my own. I certainly had no degrees that would give me any kind of authority to write anything about spirituality, but the idea came. And at first I was really excited about it, and I started to be in the process to ask what would that look like, how could that begin to take some form, and I started to just get totally overwhelmed with this swarm of ideas. Oh, we could do this, we could go there, we could do this, and it just kept spinning. And I ran through an outline probably 15 or 20 different times. There was so much possibility that I wasn't even sure how to begin to channel that down. And I got more and more frustrated, just feeling like, well, that was a beautiful idea, but I don't really know how to do this, and I don't have the tools, at least available to me at the time, to know how to do this. And the second thing, now that I look back, is I realized that I didn't take my shoes off. And my shoes around this were, A, I don't have the wisdom, and B, I really don't like to write. I still wear those shoes all the time. You will never see a blog. Well, I shouldn't say never. It's unlikely you will see me doing a weekly blog because it's like torture for me to have to sit down. Doing Sunday mornings is not fine. Nobody reads it. But to put something out there permanently that I have written gives me a lot of anxiety. So between all of that, between not really being able to get a handle on it, between the beliefs I was carrying it, I just let it die its dream. And it was probably 8 years later, I was in this church, I walked into the bookstore, and there on the bookshelf, somebody had written my book. How dare they? In fact, I said it out loud in the bookstore, somebody wrote my book. And I discovered later that the author, Sharon Janis, was kind of in the same boat as me, didn't have a whole lot of affiliation, didn't have a whole lot of background or, knowledge or degrees, and it was her first book that she ever wrote. So it was an important reminder to me that God ideas are always there. They're accessible, and yet only those who have the willingness and maybe even some greater awareness of how to work with this creative process can bring them into their full physical expression. It takes a letting and allowing of faith. It takes imagination and understanding and a willingness to be in the chaos for it to be birthed out of it. There's only one final key that we're going to explore next week. Well, the seventh key is to rest, and we'll talk about what that looks like too. The creation of man and woman in the image of God. And it's the awareness that we have been created to be conscious co-creators. That out of this one power and one presence, we are expressions of that, unique expressions of that, and we'll get all that we need in order to be able to fulfill that. We all have access to this. It is part of the power that is behind all of creation. Some things are a little bit easier to manifest than others. Wasn't that long ago, probably a month and a half ago, I was listening to a song on my way into work, and I just had this vision, a very clear vision of Rory Divins singing it. And I had a vision that Byron would come and be old Charlie Farquharson for me. And gratefully, they both had a willingness to say yes. And this vision has come into being today. Well, it is our opportunity now to share of our financial good with this ministry. We are so grateful for the many channels in which we receive our good, and we are grateful for each of you as one of those channels. In just a moment, take these gifts into our hands and into our hearts and bless them together. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. Thank you, Father, Mother God.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as our Father, family all are we. Let me walk with my family in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
And as we go into this day, into this week, willing to allow the chaos of the creative process to move through us and birth something new and beautiful. And we go knowing our prayer for protection together. The light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.